Okay, welcome all to this week's episode of Token Drop Podcast. We have a special guest, Ranjit Singh Pabla. He is with Stack Overflow. Very happy to have him join our podcast today. And I think we have some interesting things to discuss. There's been a lot of talk recently about knowledge. And so I'd like to talk about, maybe ask Ranjit, what is knowledge? And before we do that, I'll give my standard disclaimer before I forget. All opinions are those of the individual and not necessarily the company that they work for. So a lot of discussion about knowledge. Ranjit, what do you think is knowledge from a human perspective and a agent perspective from an AI, since we're talking about AI? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting. First, thank you for the opportunity to be here with such esteemed guests over here. But you guys are fantastic. I've been reading on what you guys are doing, so it's great. I think from my perspective, knowledge is an understanding, either through a studied understanding or experiential understanding of an activity and or something that we've actually kind of thinking about or talking about. That is the fundamental of knowledge to me. Like either I've studied about it or I've experienced about it or heard about it somewhere. That is the core of what I see as knowledge. I also would probably extend it to the memory part of it a little bit as well, as that when I take that knowledge and then see that happening somewhere and have an experience about it, then it's etched as memory to me as well. So I think that connection is extremely important. I look at these two things a little bit distinct.
Because in an enterprise, knowledge is the sum total of information from the different employees in the enterprise, right? So you would have to somehow gather that institutional knowledge to be able to apply it, which is, I think, a real challenge.
And then
Correct.
that I suppose presupposes, Sunil, that we're assuming that knowledge is the dominant differentiator for an enterprise ever increasingly moving forward, I guess, because that's what ends up differentiating your business, who you are, what you stand for, how you compete, I guess. Your knowledge, the company's knowledge, the organizational knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's a very important underlying over there, Sajad, because as we speak to more and more organizations in general, as we're talking to them, it's especially in the AI world and sort of going back to what you said in the agent world, what is actually happening is that it's not about like how do I actually deploy an agent anymore. It's about how do I actually kind of make it operational from an agentic perspective. How do I really scale it? How do I make sure that the knowledge is compounded and not necessarily recreated every day? All of those questions are coming more and more and more often. And that exactly is kind of the foundation of why knowledge becomes so much paramount in organizations today, especially trusted knowledge.
Indeed. And I recall, I think, in the companies that I worked, knowledge management used to be a function, right? There used to be a knowledge manager. I've been working in some of these companies, even as far back as 20 years ago. There used to be a knowledge manager, and his job was to organize some knowledge. But the efforts then were, I mean, in hindsight, they look so minuscule compared to the knowledge frontier that we are confronted with, the immense amount of knowledge that not just employees carry, knowledge that is encoded inside your applications, knowledge that is embedded inside the processes with which you transact with businesses, with customers, and everybody else. All of that is, I think I heard you earlier say, tacit knowledge or implicit knowledge. All of that constitutes knowledge. And if it was a challenge then to aggregate knowledge, I think it's become even more challenging. Recognizing what the knowledge boundaries are and not knowing how to really aggregate it, accumulate it, and then actionize that.
100%. Sam, your thoughts on that?
So yeah, I mean, Mark, I have a couple of questions for you in this regard, Ranjit. One thing is, okay, you talked about knowledge, but I would certainly like to know what amounts to omission, actually, right? I mean, have you guys thought about what it does it mean if, suppose, at authorship time, you do not know about something, right? So genuinely unknown at authorship time, um, what's the escape hatch for that, actually? Some facts don't exist until commissioning, actually. So how do you deal with that? I mean, does it become the default path unless it costs something? I mean,
So what do you mean by that, Sam? Do you mean like, somebody asks you, how do you bake a cake? And if you don't know,
yeah, you
if
don't
it,
have some facts, they don't exist until something happens, actually.
Until you
And
actually until you actually try to make the cake, then you realize
exactly.
there are some steps you didn't have enough
Yeah.
know-how about.
Yeah.
So what do you do? I mean, because you are in the business of collecting knowledge, and now you don't have all the facts. I mean, so what do you do? I mean,
I think the way I would look at it is that you make your best judgment based on the facts you have at hand,
okay.
right? As
Mhm.
the facts evolve, as the learning improves, your understanding and appreciation of that knowledge evolves as well. Okay, if your approach is only static, that like, hey, this is what it is, like it or not, and then you'll never bake the cake, like what you said earlier, right? You'll end up losing the egg in between somewhere, or like
Mhm.
you didn't have the right temperatures. But as you kind of evolve, that's experiential knowledge which comes in over there. And there's a lot of tacit knowledge, like Sajad, we were talking about earlier as well, is that, hey, a conversation which we are having today, okay, which is getting recorded, and that transcript kind of informs an existing set of what we have already created. So knowledge cannot be that definitive. It has to continuously evolve. That's how human brains evolve as well, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So I
It
think
would come with some sort of confidence, right? Like
yes,
my wife asked me something. If I know, I'll tell her, here's how I do it. Or I might just say, hey, I kind of guess this is the way you do it. I think the AI will probably have the same challenges.
it does. And I think the opportunity for all of us to actually having the right control parameters around that, and Sam, this is going back to the point we were discussing earlier as well, like what are the missions and everything, is that like as long as we are able to uh, accurately say and accept the fact that this is more at this point in time, not 100% trust level or X, Y, and Z level, that it is more experiential at this point in time. It has not come from a subject matter expert in this. It has not gone through the rigor of what needs to go to actually kind of prove it in the market. That allows and keeps the boundaries very clear. And then if you actually make it very declarative, for and document in very declarative way, that makes it very clear for an agent also to use it in a more clearer fashion than just a human. Humans would make a judgment based on what you see. They see like an orange light or something like that, and they feel that, oh, you know what? Let me kind of recheck this. But for an agent, you have to put a score. You might have to put a score of 40% on that instead of like a 75% or 80%. So that part is that's how I look at it, Sam.
Okay. I mean, because basically why I brought the question was um, I just wanted to look at it. Okay, you have knowledge and you have omission. Now, contradiction is findable because two values, one fact, but a fact nobody thought about. You need to be able to distinguish that, right? I mean, and you then comes the notion what we are doing, completeness and verifiability, right? I mean, so therefore, what you really flow through in that is how do you really find omissions? How do you detect omissions? How do you know that true facts have not been presented in a fact because there was an omission? It's not even a contradiction at that level. Actually, that makes it even more hard, I think, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead, Sujat.
No, no, complete your thought,
No, I
please.
was just saying, like, it's just spot on. I think another impact point is like, it's not just linear, right? It's not like, and this is where actually traditionally, like human consume knowledge in a very linear fashion. I want to read this. I want to read it go this way. But the advantage with machines is that they actually can go in every direction, which is where the graphical relationships become so much more important because the omissions or validations, whichever way you want to look at it, could come from different signals from different places. Okay, and that makes it so much more relevant in today's world in what we are dealing with in terms of knowledge, how we are actually gathering and storing knowledge as well.
Absolutely. I think that was great. I mean, thank you for that because
Yes.
some of these things have been all along, right? Been hearing people. I mean, how much is the model depending on authoring rigor actually today? I
Well,
mean, as
I
we
have a
look at
question on what Ranjit just said, if you don't mind,
yeah,
Sam. I was trying
yeah, sure,
to,
sure. Go
I
ahead.
was just processing that. So you said that humans look at things linearly, like a book,
Right.
and I look chapter by chapter. But you're saying that AI doesn't need to go chapter one, chapter two. It can go chapter one, chapter 10, chapter three, chapter eight, just jump around, and in the end, it'll get all that knowledge,
Correct.
even though it's jumped all around. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, and probably not just not it can go in multiple dimensions, I would say. It's not like just chapters and this and so on and so forth. I'll give an example, like a very practical example of if you were to look at an engine light in a traditional internal combustion engine car, okay, or the ICE car as they call it, right? Sorry, we're to make the distinction because some of us drive electric cars, but the ICE car. So in that light, we are trained as humans to look at that light and say, like, hey, the engine light comes over there. This is how we read it. There's a problem with the engine. Okay. Now, when imagine if an agent over there was actually kind of looking at it, they're looking at it not like our linear brains thinking like engine problem, hence the engine light is there. An agent is thinking at it, say like, hey, it could be a diode failure, it could be some other kind of a LED failure, it could be something else which is actually kind of triggering a response in the system, which is actually telling the engine or the computer that this is wrong over here. So it is actually at one time almost like a spider web. It's going into multiple directions and looking at every element of what it could be there. One, it should, if it has the authority to look at it, then it can come to the answer much more faster and can actually detect that problem much more faster than what a human brain would do it that way. And that's the advantage of how this relations are
Yeah.
there.
And I think you're spot on, Ranjit. I think that reminds me, I worked at AWS for some time, and I think one of the things they used to tell us was if you have a thought, or if you have an idea, write it down in 6 pages or at least. So I mean, even subjects that you assumed you know quite a lot about, as you start to write that subject down, then you start to discover the sloppiness of your thinking. You discover how inexact your estimates were, and then you discover the knowledge gap. You realize by the time you've written your first paragraph, you realize maybe I should go do a little bit more research to
Well,
write the next paragraph. So, and that's how sloppy our thinking is. But when you have a machine that's systematically executing, and as you correctly pointed out, we call this, when we were building graphs a long time ago, we used to call them 360-degree perspective, right? When you're designing a graph for an oil well, we call it oil well 360 degrees or customer 360 degrees, right? You're trying to get an all-round perspective, which means your facts could come from any direction and you're stitching them together, you're connecting them to that entity, and you're building out, as you said, a spider web around that nugget of knowledge. And that it kind of extends that knowledge. Then it bridges gaps within multiple entities, and you quickly discover that they're actually connected through different pathways. So yes, I think you're right. And and if you have to and if you have to serve knowledge to agents, it's far more challenging than to serve knowledge to human beings. Human beings can make some assumptions, then they'll go discover through experiences and come back and maybe assume or make up some knowledge and continue to make progress, whereas an agent can fall flat. So you have to serve exact knowledge, precise knowledge, and you have to have as much uh, knowledge in depth. And I think increasingly what we're also discovering is automated reasoning, right? Just like a human being would. I mean, if someone were to give you some nugget of knowledge, you might be thinking about it subconsciously as you're walking or as you're having dinner or watching some TV. And then you might add to that nugget of knowledge by connecting that to other experiences, other pieces of knowledge that you might have. And sometimes it takes conscious effort. And to do so with machines is far easier because now you can have these background processes that they are reasoning with knowledge, discovering those gaps, uh, and to call out the knowledge gap, uh, I think, challenge that Sam posed. Agents that are doing this reasoning can also discover gaps within their own knowledge. They need not be explicitly told that you got these gaps. They could actually discover those gaps as they're reasoning through that knowledge. So it's a fascinating subject, and given that we are now tasked with serving knowledge both to humans and to agents, I think the latter is significantly more challenging.
So
It certainly is. Go ahead, sorry, sir.
No, I mean, I just had a thought in this regard. Like, for example, in the same vein, look at what rational really means, right? I mean, we have something like, say, we chose X because customer security team rejected Y. This is a generic statement, right? But that you put in an LLD, that's a reasoning you say, and it has no machine consumer. But how can it be typed like a fact, right? I mean, that's a bigger question that you have. Where does rationality or rational live actually? I mean, does it live in the reasoning layer or does it live in somewhere else?
So, in fact, this is just if I were to take a stab at that, the way we look at it, both from my organization as well as I in person, I mean, like, to make sure that let's look at it differently. If you were to actually, if I'm a machine, I'm an agent, and if I were to consume knowledge, and if I were to do a task, I need clear instructions. Okay, I need like just to take the cake, bake a cake kind of an example over there. I would take this is the steps to actually bake a cake. It's not like go to your mom, go to your dad, go to your auntie, or to go to your grandma to actually go ask her how to do it. Humans can, but as an agent, I need clear instructions. And that clear instructions should include for what is like, like, hey, this much of flour needs to be taken over there. And then, hey, if I'm using whole milk, then I should use this kind of milk for that. And if I need actually, what do you call it, say skim milk, I should use this kind of a milk for that, this much amount of milk, or I should probably, kind of regurgitate as this much and so. The experiential tacit knowledge.
Hmm.
Okay, that is where it is. That needs to be very clearly defined. And I think that's the true challenge most organizations are facing today. It's not about the things like confluences and everything as such or the likes are storing the end state like an architecture diagram and all of that kind of good stuff there, right? You have solutions which actually store end state knowledge. The what has already been done there. But why I did it,
Yeah.
okay, the experiential conversational knowledge, the
Yes.
tacit information, that is something I think most organizations are struggling with in storing that.
Mm.
And that in combination with the structured one, which you already have, is the ideal recipe to be served to an agent. And I'm saying that why it's so important is we can actually let the agent also go do reasoning. Okay. But the moment you let that agent go do reasoning, it is consuming tokens like crazy.
Mhm.
Okay, and you can't afford to actually have that in a world of tokenomics. So how do I coming back to the original question around like, what is knowledge and how do I actually operationalize this at scale for my organization without necessarily, burning down my bank in the process of doing that is about combining this, the what kind of structured knowledge with the experiential and the tacit knowledge, which is there in most of these organizations, so that together they find a very declarative way of telling a machine how to do things. Human will still find a way. It's the machine that needs to understand very clearly as to what needs to be done. Now, does not mean that they may not have the inherent emissions, Sam, that you brought up earlier. That would be there. And as they are creating new solutions in the process, you are able to now actually, kind of bring that in as well to actually form a full organizational layer of knowledge, which is, or and memory, both combined together, which actually could be served to agents. Now, which also kind of becomes a foundation for as you go into business as a code kind of next journey where you go there. And a lot of organizations are wanting to go there at the very early stage of going there into business as code because even the fundamental knowledge of what things have been very clearly defined, we haven't really clearly defined that itself. Uh, Getting to a stage where we can clearly write the entire business operations as a declarative, process path, very different, very difficult. I mean, the classic example would be like either of you leave the organization and go, there's a huge knowledge gap.
Absolutely.
Okay, and that is extremely, it's difficult for somebody to fill until I'm taking Sunil's brain, Sujat's brain,
Yeah.
Sam's brain, and actually kind of
Yep.
codifying that. As
We
a
had a guest, Werner Gertz, who talked exactly that. When your employees leave, their knowledge walks out the door.
exactly.
Yeah. It was a very interesting podcast.
Actually, he brought a very
Honestly,
important point,
e-
right? The tokenomics is very important. There are several metadata questions and several hundred facts, right? But only a subset of them, right, is cheap to get, and others are expensive to govern, right? So how do you know? I mean, if everything is tier one, nothing is, right? So practically, we need to be able to look at that and say, okay, which of these is actually blocking you? I mean, so how do you do that in your space right now as you're working through this, actually?
Yeah, I think our biggest thing is about creating a trust layer around that, right? I mean, like, hey, we look at how topics are emerging, how organizations are looking at who the SMEs are in terms of who's answering the right questions, whose questions are being used and adopted on a regular basis. And then that trust layer and the provenance layer around that, the usability of that knowledge, how often it's being done, where it goes, who's using it, what's the kind of rating they're getting around that, how often it's been challenged. All of that stuff goes into a layer of trust signal, which is there, which allows for people to know, and even the freshness of it, right? Was it created yesterday or was it created about 2 years back? All of that goes into a layer of trust. So that's the fundamental difference. I mean, like you can bring all of the stuff, but if you can't put a level of trust on top of that, that's of no value. Because then you don't know what is right or what is wrong. To your point, Sam, earlier. I mean, like so you bring that trusted layer there, and that allows for both humans and agents to understand as to how to consume this knowledge in the best possible way. What is it's more easier said than done. I think the challenge around is to actually how do you do it in such a way that you're able to actually kind of bring in also a subset of data, not just a metadata, because and you guys have also been in search, so you know this. It's like when you're bringing most of the time when you're doing search, it's very dependent on the source document, right? If the source document, let's say tomorrow, the source document is out, that metadata and everything actually goes out of the door
Correct.
because, like, you're still kind of tying it, you're indexing it, but you're still tying it back to the source document. Okay, we kind of do it a little bit differently sometimes, like to kind of we bring a subset of that knowledge itself. So irrespective of whether the source knowledge is there or not, you actually have the knowledge in the organization. So that's a little bit unique, and hence we're able to give the trusted score a little bit more better, kind of validity around that.
But
another
isn't the
dimension to that
temporality of
is,
the
yeah, go ahead, Sam. Go ahead.
But isn't the temporality of that data very important? Because, for example, I have something which is true today, but it's not true tomorrow. You just don't brought the point that knowledge is time-based, right? As time progresses, the knowledge that we accumulated may not be true. So when you're doing a search, that's why you say, okay, when was this created? Is something you need to know to say that knowledge is trustworthy. So are you saying that we need to timestamp everything actually? Do graphs need to be timestamped? Do the nodes need to be timestamped so that when you pick something, you know you are really picking up the
But the
relevant
challenge,
data?
the thing, Sam, there is how do you know? You're assuming that old is bad, new is good, but it could be your,
We don't know.
E
Yeah.
is equal to MC squared is still good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're so spot on, Sunil. And I was
Yeah.
about to answer Sam the same way. It's like, hey, I don't change architectural diagrams every 6 months, every 3 months. If I'm a bank, I don't change that. I mean, I would create a 3 years architecture or a 2 year architecture or whatever. It takes me that much of time as a bank to move and make things happen. Okay, so hence something that is 2 years old in a base document not does not necessarily means it's not valid anymore. But 2 years back, I might have created something with, let's say, API access as a fundamental way of accessing something. But within the last 2 years, MCP has become the new way of accessing a lot of things. Okay, so I need to actually have, and that is where the timestamping is important. Okay, but I need to be able to, there might be some tacit conversation in Teams calls or something like that. You said, like, don't change the architecture diagram. It's such a pain to go through that change because I need to go back to, approval systems and all the stuff. Use MCP as a first level connector. And if you don't have it, go back to APIs. So that architecture doesn't change, but MCP is still there. So that's a conversation that happened in a Teams call or in a Teams channel or in a Slack channel or some other place. And now I need to be able to bring that and attach it to this core knowledge base so that when humans as well as agents are actually kind of consuming this, they know that, like, hey, there is an override here which was at this time and it was done by a SME who actually also authored the original document. Okay, or was somebody who's actually like now more current in the same role or similar kind of capacity who's actually authored it. And now that overrides what is there over there in the architecture diagram. But if this does not stand true, then I go back to this. So that clarity is actually now there. And that's why that full node trust signal becomes so much more better. Okay, so it's not that the diagram goes bad just because we're 2 years old.
I think we're almost out of time. Sajad, it looks like you've been
I have
chomping at the bit to say something. Please
no,
go ahead.
I just had only one last question for Ranjit, and this is given your role and given what your company does. I was just curious, what are you seeing at the frontiers of business as code, right? What are people doing really, really at the frontiers of this concept?
I would, it's very interesting, Sujal, you asked that question because we've all been in work for so long. I mean, I think all of us have individually been at least about at the minimum 20 to 30 years of experience in different companies, right? Individually. So
Yeah.
collective, a lot of brain power here, actually. So, and I'm bringing this up is because there is a repetition of sort in terms of like patterns you see, right? Uh, Now, think about like how the RPA days were and everything is such. When RPA came there, everybody was like all RPA, 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 and everything as such. Similarly, when the cloud came, everybody was on the cloud bandwagon. Everybody was asked to actually, hey, let's get cloud going, and everything. And then suddenly, like when consumption started going out of hands, let's optimize it. Similarly with AI, like let's use it, use it, use it, and then when it's going out of hand, let's optimize it. Similarly, on the business as a code side, I think everybody's experimenting at this point in time. And as we look at it, there are three or four. The advantages that with the LLM space is that things are happening much more faster. We look at it like people are looking at organizations looking at three different parts. One is how do I actually make my internal systems and products better? Okay, how do I like first the CIO's office, let's put it, not the CTO's office, the CIO's office, where now how do I run my organization better? Okay, so what RPAs used to be doing in the past of doing back office transactions and everything as such, now they want to convert that into very clear signals, a declarative way of policies and principles put down into knowledge paths, so that an LLM can do it. And they don't want to do an RPA route because tomorrow SAP changes maybe moves a symbol from here to here. Suddenly RPA has to be reconfigured and all this stuff. When you're able to configure the policy rightly, you're able to actually kind of solve for that. That's one part. The second part is we're seeing a lot of this happening with, of course, the CTO's organization in terms of how do I actually kind of, make sure that particularly for as a service products, how do I continuously keep evolving on newer versioning, newer data points, newer capabilities in a much more faster way. Then we have the go-to-market teams, okay, where we have go-to-market teams where they're looking at it from a point of, hey, how do we actually, our systems are spread across so many different individual silos. They have their own agentic system, like something in Salesforce, something in ServiceNow, something into some kind of a contract lifecycle management solution. But if I want to take a quote to cash process, okay, if I want to codify this in the right way and then have an agent manage that, how do I actually kind of, do that? And then lastly, I think there is a huge push in terms of partners, okay, because most of the larger organizations have a huge partner network. And the challenge is that everybody's developing stuff so fast the opportunity for the partners to understand it and then kind of take it in, like internalize it and go out there and do something. It's taking a ton of time. The partner organizations are getting slashed so dramatically in most organizations. So you don't have partner managers in many organizations the way it used to be in the past. But the new products are evolving so often, and there's so many conflicting information coming. So they're trying to make sure that they're codifying that side of it as well as in a very way. So almost in every space, you're seeing that things are happening. Like with RPA, similar back office is taking precedence over front office. Okay, because and if there's anything else in terms of processes, like if people are taking human in the front end of it and then everything else in the back end of it, the internal processes which were actually taking a lot of hand like table movements or paper movement across different tables now is actually getting agentified. So that is actually happening a lot more. So front office, they're not necessarily going completely go to market. They're not going completely like I go all agents. Still the humans, like people like you and I talking to people is extremely important. The background work which was there, they're actually codifying it quite a bit to make it simple. I mean, a simple thing like even generating a proposal today has become so much more easier than what it was a few
Yeah.
years back. Creating an account plan becomes so much more easier than what it was so many years back. So yeah, so that's where we're seeing. How about you guys?
Yeah, that's really, it's a challenge. I think, our view was that customers initially were all in with LLMs. They thought LLM could solve for everything. But I think over the last year, year and a half, we started to see that people are now demanding that trust layer because and those guardrails, right? Should an LLM make a mistake, how do you prevent an autonomous agent from creating a cascade of compounding problems that could have pretty disastrous effects downstream? So that is the thing, right? I think now you see over the last, just if you're on Twitter, 2 months ago, it was all about loop engineering. And then they realized, oh, yeah, but loops burn tokens. So now, for the last week or 2 weeks, now I'm starting to see graph engineering. Really, graphs is really the way to go. I think people are discovering that you need to build reliable systems, but it's becoming a trial and error kind of a process, discovering one step at a time. So, yeah, but for those who've been in the industry a long time, who've known the kinds of challenges that businesses will encounter. And if you've taken up a position knowing that these are the challenges they'll encounter, but this is where they will need to get to, and then define that vision and wait for people to meet you there, I think that's probably, a good thing to do. So that's really what we are starting to see. Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the last word because I think we've exceeded our time, but it's been a good exceeding. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Ranjit. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate
Likewise.
it.
Thank you
Really
very much.
lovely.
So
Thank
if
you.
Thank
you
you.
could hang out for just a second, I'll stop the recording and then we can finish up.